parenting is hard, especially if your kids are making bad choices that go against God's will. So Jesus told a story about a son like that, and it's called the parable of the prodigal son. The good news is that he eventually came to his senses. Let's see how it happened. Luke 15. A man had two sons. Jesus is telling the story. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed. Now we can get into this, but basically this was incredibly offensive, and maybe you've been offended by your kids. Maybe you've got a kid that's wandered off, that wants to just go his own way, is not interested at all in honoring God. So let's look at what happens in the story. Verse 17, when he finally came to his senses, so you can go back and read those other verses to see that he was eating with the pigs and all that stuff. You probably know the story, but it says this, he finally came to his senses. This is what we want to look at. And he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. So he said this, I'm going to go home to my father. I'm going to say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. Now, for you as a parent, if you've got a son like this just makes your heart sore to think, man, I just pray that my kid could do that someday. But here's the point I want you to think about for this video. The prodigal son came to his senses when he thought about the goodness of his father. Go back to that verse and you'll see that. He says, at home, my servants have enough food to spare, and I'm dying of hunger. He knew that his father was good. This is so fundamental for us as parents to understand. He came to his senses because of the goodness of the Father. This reminds me of Romans 2. In verse 4, it says, don't you see how wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that his goodness is intended, his kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? So if you have a prodigal child, don't forget this point. You can't make decisions for your kids. You can set boundaries and you can pray for them, but ultimately they have to make their own choices. So make sure that they know that you are good. So honor God as a parent. Make sure that when they think of you, they think of goodness. And then maybe when they're eating with the pigs, they'll come to their senses. Now, I know there's a balance between being kind, tolerant, and patient and being enabling them with your goodness. Now, there's a balance. You'll need to talk about that. So why don't you do that now? But don't forget to be good and make sure that they long to come back.